She had exchanged herself not for love, not for trust, but simply for a roof over her head, a place to survive. Yet in doing so, in the grip of desperation, she had unwittingly stepped into something lonelier, deeper, a man's command that cloaked itself as protection, that whispered of safety, but held the weight of ownership. And yet, in that same grim trade, she would find a hearth, a place to stand, and a life no other soul had dared offer her. New Mexico Territory, 1881. The land blistered under the season's dry spell, its cracked skin drinking in the wind's dust like an old habit. Across the horizon, a rust-colored haze blurred the line between earth and sky, and above, the sun glared like a dull copper coin, molten but cold. The hills, stripped and silent, rose like the bones of giants under a sky that offered no comfort, no mercy. On the edge of town stood the chapel, its once white walls now dulled by wind-blown earth, leaning slightly as though tired of faith and time. Inside, silence hung like a shroud, broken only by the scent of incense too old to be sacred and the faint creak of empty pews. Carol moved along the side aisle, her steps careful, the hymn book clutched tightly to her chest. Not for song, but for steadiness. Her dress was simple, the fabric coarse, hem mended with crooked stitches, her hair tied back in a ribbon so faded it could no longer claim color. Her face held the solemn grace of someone raised on obedience, her features soft but shaped by the weight of downcast eyes and unspoken prayers. She had come only to tend to the altar, dust it, straighten the candles, refill the oil, but her steps faltered when voices drifted from behind the vestry door. A murmur at first, a man's voice low and clipped, her father's voice calm, practiced, the cadence of years spent preaching judgment cloaked in love. "I have no gold," he said, every word deliberate, "but I have a daughter." The silence that followed was thick. Then another voice, oily and sure, "Clyde Hargan. I'll treat her like something fine," he said, his tone twisting sweetness into threat, "long as she remembers her place." Carol stopped breathing. Her fingers tightened on the hymn book, knuckles white. She stepped forward without knowing how her feet moved, heart hammering like a trapped bird beneath her collar. "What does that mean?" Her voice rang out, clear and unshaken, a sound that didn't belong in such stillness. The two men turned. Her father's face pinched, tore between fury and something colder. Clyde only smiled, tipping his hat like they were discussing livestock. "I heard you," she said, louder now to both of them, but most of all to herself. "You're selling me." Her father's face darkened. "Mind your tone." "Is it unholy," she asked, "to demand the truth, or just inconvenient?" The slap came fast, louder than expected, in the sacred hush. She reeled, cheeks stinging, but stood her ground, eyes wide, hand trembling against her skin. He did not apologize. Suffering, he told her, as if reading scripture, is the cause of salvation. You'll do your duty, as your mother did before you. Something inside Carol broke, not like glass, but like chains. Her tears never came. Only breath, jagged and alive. "No," she whispered, her voice filled with something older than rebellion. "Not like this." That night, beneath a moon smeared in dust, she was led to the carriage. Two of Clyde's hired hands stood waiting, silent, expressionless beneath the brims of their hats. Carol wore her Sunday dress. No cloak, no bag. She carried nothing but the shock of goodbye unspoken. Her father did not look at her. The wheels turned. The town disappeared behind her, swallowed by night. Hours passed. The road stretched like a sentence written without mercy. The air turned colder, the desert opening on either side like a mouth waiting to devour. She watched the driver, the heavy shape of him swaying with the reins, lit faintly by the lantern that swung with every bump. The pressure built behind her ribs, panic, raw and sudden. Her hands curled, her breath came fast. Then she moved, without thinking, without plan, with a cry that tore the stillness. She hurled herself from the carriage. The earth met her like a fist. Her dress ripped on thorn and gravel, knees shredded, pain biting in every limb. Dust clogged her mouth, her eyes. The world tilted. The wheels never stopped. They never looked back. She got up. Somehow, blood ran from her temple, legs trembling, ankle twisted with every step. But she moved, off the road, into the Black Hills, into the waiting brush and crooked trees. She had no food, no compass, no name for where she was going, only the need to be gone. Her breathing, harsh and loud, was the only sound that followed her. She didn't remember falling, didn't recall the moment her body gave in. She only remembered the silence, wide, endless. Her skin no longer felt the cold. Her mouth too dry to taste air. Her limbs forgotten. She sank. Into dirt, into the hush, into that narrow place between pain and peace. That winter brought strange weather. Snow where it shouldn't fall. Thin layers of white spread across red hills, clinging to dry brush like frost on old bones. Chaza, tracking deer along the southern ridge, saw her first, a shape that didn't belong, crumpled at the base of a twisted cedar. He moved carefully, bow lowered, feet quiet against the crusted frost. As he neared, he saw a girl, young, torn, bloodied, her skin raw with wind, her breath shallow. And around her neck, he saw it, the cord, the feathers, one black, one white, one faded crimson. He crouched, brushing them gently, reverently. A Comanche mark, rare, sacred, not a claim of birth, but of possibility, of spirit left behind and spirit found. A sign of return not by blood, but by fate. He asked no questions then. Not yet. He gathered her into his arms, her weight fragile, her warmth fading. Back at the village, firelight danced across hides and carved wood, smoke curling toward the night sky. He did not take her to the warriors, not to the chief. He took her to Nakoma. The old woman sat by the hearth, her hair long, braided with thistle and shards of old bone. She looked up as he entered, her eyes narrowing, not with suspicion, but with recognition. "She is marked," Chosa murmured in Comanche, laying the unconscious girl onto a bed of woven reeds and pelts with the care one might give a broken-winged bird. Nakoma stepped closer, her fingers brushing the feather tied at the girl's neck, the token delicate, sacred. She gave a single solemn nod. The earth returns what was taken. Chosa said nothing more. He left her in the heat of Nakoma's lodge and disappeared into the waiting dark, swallowed by the night like a man carrying the weight of unspoken memory. Carol awoke to the earthy scent of cedar smoke curling in the air, the soft hiss and crackle of fire a heartbeat beside her. Her vision was smeared and swimming, but she could feel the warmth soaking into her bones. A heavy blanket of hides was tucked around her, sheltering her trembling limbs. Her throat was raw, her lips, split and dry, barely moved. A hand lifted a bowl to her mouth. Cool water touched her tongue. She drank in small, cautious sips. Across from her, a woman sat cross-legged, watching her with eyes the color of deep river stone. Ancient, patient, quietly measuring. "Nakoma!" Carol opened her mouth to speak, but no words formed. Nakoma silenced her with a single raised palm. "Rest," she said gently. "The wind will wait." When Carol's strength returned in uneven bursts, she managed to sit up. The hides slipped from her shoulders. Beside her lay two small feathers, faded and worn. She reached for them, fingers brushing their softness, and looked up at Nakoma. "I don't know how it got to me," she said quietly. "It was my mother's." Her voice faltered, but she didn't offer more. She didn't know how to. Carol swallowed back a rising ache. "Please," she whispered. "I have nowhere else. I'll do anything to stay." Her hands curled into her lap. Her voice broke. "Anything, if that's what it takes, even," her eyes lowered, "even me." A breath stirred the silence behind her. She turned slightly. Chosa stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, face carved from stone. His voice came low, steady, and resolute. "This is not a place where bodies are bartered for belonging." Carol stared at him, stung by the truth in his tone. He continued, "You may work, you may learn, you may heal, but gratitude here is not measured in flesh." Without waiting for a reply, he stepped back into the cold and left her sitting in the firelight's hush. Her fingers found the chain at her neck, gripped it tightly. Outside, the ice began to weep beneath the touch of the first sun in days. On the third morning, beneath a pale Comanche moon, Carol knelt by the fire ring and swept away ash with a branch of juniper. Her limbs still ached, but the fog of weakness had finally lifted. She felt her body again, not as a cage, but as her own. Noah sat close by, rolling herbs between her palms, wild mint and sweet grass mingling the air like memory. "You do not stir the pot until it breathes," she said, handing Carol a carved wooden spoon. Not before, not after. Carol leaned over the clay pot, watching the steam rise in fragrant curls. Inside, the stew simmered with wild rabbit, dried corn, squash, and desert herbs. Her hand trembled slightly as she stirred. "Like this?" Nakoma, watching from her woven mat, nodded once. "You are learning to eat without burning down the lodge." Carol laughed, a small sound, but real. "It feels like you're teaching me to live like I belong. First eat, then we'll see," the old woman replied, eyes gleaming with dry humor. So the mornings came, with fire, with root and bone and bark pulled from the land, with silence in the spaces between spoken things. Nakoma never lectured. Her teachings were offered like seeds, meant to be planted, not explained. How to grind bark into salve, how to dry and salt meat for winter, how to bind a wound with willow and patience. Carol's fingers blistered. Her eyes stung from the smoke. Still, she worked. Chosa remained mostly silent. He moved like wind through the camp, always near, never loud. He brought water without asking, stacked kindling sharper than needed, and, without a word, laid another blanket over her shoulders in the night when hers had slipped away. She never saw him do it, only felt the warmth after. One morning, while tying bundles of herbs beneath the lodge beams, Carol paused mid-motion. Nakoma was humming a tune, soft, rhythmic, familiar. It snagged in Carol's chest like a hook. "My mother used to hum that," she said slowly, "when she worked in the garden." Nakoma didn't respond at first. Then, "What was her name?" "Amara," Carol said. Her hand lifted to her neck instinctively. She had a scar here, behind her left ear. Said she fell off a pony as a child. Nakoma's gaze grew sharp, but her voice stayed soft. "She was one of ours, before they took her, before they gave her a name that suited their books." Carol's breath caught. The air felt too thin. The fire popped in the hearth, and still, Nakoma did not look away. Carol's hands dropped limply to her lap. Her voice barely rose above a breath. "She never told me," she whispered. "Just gave me the feather and said, 'Someday it will guide you home.'" Nakoma's expression didn't shift, but her words settled like earth on a grave. She did not forget. She waited for the world to remember her. Later, that same evening, Carol stood at the cook fire again, stirring the stew's thick surface with a carved spoon Noah had handed her days before. Behind her, Chosa sat near the doorway, sharpening a bone-handled knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The scraping sound was rhythmic, grounding. Without turning, she spoke. "My mother was Comanche." It was not a question, not a plea for confirmation. It was a truth newly understood, spoken aloud for first time. Chosa looked up from his blade. "I think I understand now," Carol continued, "why she never told me." He paused in his work, the edge of his knife catching the firelight. "She wasn't silent," he said. "She was surviving." Something shifted inside Carol then, not just how she saw her mother, but how she saw the land beneath her feet. The earth no longer felt indifferent. She began to notice its language, the way water lingered in the low places after rain, the way the wind carried stories through juniper branches, the way fire snapped sharply when wood was dried to its bones. Nakoma's hands, gnarled and sure, moved through herbs like a grandmother touching the heads of sleeping children. And Chosa, he stepped around wildflowers without crushing a single petal. Don't try to understand a person by their words. Nakoma had told her once, slicing dried fruit with a blade carved from bone. Watch how they touch the earth. Carol repeated that to herself like breath, like prayer, like a reason to keep going. One afternoon, she sat alone near the fire pit, her fingers tracing the beadwork on her tunic. Children's voices rose in the air nearby. Laughter and shouts in Comanche. She couldn't yet speak, but longed to learn. She no longer shrank from their eyes when they looked at her, no longer asked herself why she was here, because something in the soil had begun to know her, and she in turn had started to know it. The nights grew colder. The stars that once pierced the heavens like knives now hid behind thick cloud, as if the sky itself had drawn a curtain. The world felt smaller, darker. Carol sat by the low fire in Nakoma's lodge, watching the flames dance in silence. Her hands were cracked and red from scrubbing hides, her sleeves damp. Her chest ached, not with illness, but with the slow erosion of hope. Outside, the village lay still, but she felt its weight pressing in. The silence had turned to stares, the stares to whispers, and the whispers cut deeper than words. One morning, she found ashes in the water pot, not soot from cooking, but the bitter remains of burned roots and herbs, blackened and twisted. Nakoma said nothing. She simply emptied the pot with a sigh and started boiling fresh water. Another time, the thread she was using to mend a child's tunic frayed and broke halfway through the seam. Cut clean, the tunic ruined. She found the simple cotton dress Nakoma had given her days before, folded neatly as if untouched, ripped down the back seam. But the following evening, her tunic had been mended. The stitching was seamless. The thread matched perfectly. And the next morning, the water pot sat full beside the fire. Clear, clean, and cold. She began to notice more. A bundle of sage left near her mat. Dried meat placed just a little closer to the lodge than usual. Firewood stacked in neat rows, replenished under the cloak of night. She never caught him doing it, but she knew. Chosa's hands were in the quiet. And one night, when the fire was no more than a flickering breath and Nakoma slept soundly in the corner, Carol sat on the dirt floor alone. Arms wrapped around her knees, she cried, not loud, not broken, the kind of weeping that came from deep places, slow and worn like a river carving stone, the kind of grief that lives in your chest and leaks out when the world has stopped looking. She had worked, learned, bled. She had never asked for kindness, only space to exist. But still, it wasn't enough the shadow moved outside the lodge. Then, without sound, Chosa stepped inside. He didn't speak, didn't ask. He crouched beside the dying fire, reached into the pouch at his hip, and pulled something small from within, wrapped in doeskin and tied with sinew. Carol took it with careful hands, her fingers brushing his. She unwrapped it slowly, reverently. Inside was a small pouch filled with ash, dark, fine, and fragrant, mixed with crushed cedar, and a sliver of bone. It wasn't just ash. It was ancestral, a sacred gift, a symbol of memory, of fire shared and lineage honored, of being claimed without words. Tears clung to her cheeks. She looked up at him. She asked, voice raw, "Why do you believe in me?" Chosa didn't answer with his mouth. Instead, he bent down, pressed a finger to the dirt floor, and began to draw. Slow, deliberate strokes. A word took shape carved in dust. She leaned forward to read it. Because you did not beg. You only asked to do. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, and saw not just a warrior or a guardian, but someone who would watch her fall and rise again without fanfare, without demand. He looked back, not with tenderness, but with the raw, unfiltered weight of truth. Beneath the sky stripped of stars, where the silence felt as vast as the land itself, something inside her shifted. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become more. Something not given, but earned. Each morning before the sun reached high enough to warm the valley floor, Carol sat cross-legged in the dust beside the village children. They circled her like sparks dancing around a flame, small hands clutching sticks, etching lines and symbols into the earth with the eager focus only children possessed. These lessons had become ritual now, not marked by chalkboards or pages, but by the rhythm of dust, the patience of repetition, and the ancient beat of memory. Nakoma stood behind them, arms folded over her chest, her voice calm and deliberate as she led them to the morning's words in Comanche. Her cadence was like a low chant, musical and reverent, as though each syllable held power. At one point, she gestured toward the glowing hearth. "Fire," she said. Carol echoed the word, her tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds, her voice lower and less certain than the others. She tried again. The children giggled, not with cruelty, but with that bright, unfiltered joy that only young hearts can offer. One little girl reached out, placing her hand gently on Carol's, repeating the words slowly until they spoke it together. When Carol finally got it right, the group erupted in cheers as if she had summoned the dawn herself. Later that week, Nicoma placed a string of bark fiber in Carol's hand and told her to ask the children for more words: air, water, stone. And with each word came laughter, came shared looks, came closeness. Language had ceased to be mere sound. It had become connection, ceremony, invitation. But one afternoon, the rhythm shattered. From the river bank, shouts pierced the quiet. Carol's head snapped up, breath hitching in her chest. A boy, no older than 5, had slipped while reaching for a bundle of leaves adrift in the current. The river, swollen from the night's rain, surged colder and faster than usual. His tiny arms flailed against the water, panic overtaking his face. Her feet hit the current with a splash, skirt dragging heavy behind her, hair snapping in her face. She lunged forward just as the boy slipped under, her hands finding the collar of his tunic. The river pulled them both under. Cold toward her lungs. She surfaced, gasping, but her grip held fast. Together they tumbled, then staggered back onto the bank, soaked, coughing, alive. No one spoke. They simply watched. And then, slowly, silently, they turned and resumed their lives. That night, as Carol sat by her fire wrapped in a thin blanket, arms hugging her knees, she saw something placed near the coals. A clay bowl. Inside, ripe berries, plump, dark, untouched. She stared at them for a long time, the flames casting flickers of light across her face. The next morning, No came to her with a gift, a shawl woven from soft wool, dyed with crushed roots and stitched with simple red patterns. "A thank you," the old woman said, offering no names. Carol didn't ask, but she felt the change. It was in the glances that no longer slid away so quickly, in the greetings that were offered before she could give hers, in the children who now ran to her at dawn, tugging her sleeves, eager to name the world in words she had taught them. Even the older women, once tight-lipped and wary, nodded as she passed. Chaza remained unchanged, quiet, constant, always near, but never close, until one evening, just as the sky turned violet and gold, he came to her. Carol was outside the lodge, grinding dried corn. Her hands were stiff from work, her back aching. She looked up as his shadow fell over her. In his hand was a small bundle wrapped in weathered buckskin. He offered it without a word. She wiped her palms on her skirt and took it gently. "What is it?" she asked. She untied it slowly, her fingers careful with the knots. Inside, a bracelet, soft leather, tightly woven. At its center, a single carved bead. The markings on it were precise, graceful. One word, "Nita." She traced it with her thumb, her voice faltering. Chaza's reply was a whisper carried on wind. "The one who begins again." Her breath caught. Her eyes searched his, the world shrinking to firelight and heartbeat. "Is that me?" she asked. "L." She looked down, then back up, eyes shining. "If I am the beginning," she said softly, "then you are where I begin." Chaza didn't smile, but in his gaze, she saw something more profound than approval, recognition. And in his stillness, she felt more seen than in all the pews and prayers of her old life. They stood together as the sun dipped behind the hills. No vows, no promises, only the quiet gravity of two people once broken, now slowly, deliberately becoming whole, be why late morning, dust spiraled at the village's edge. 5 riders, maybe 6. Their coats hung heavy with dust, their faces drawn with arrogance and greed. At their center rode Clyde Heron, silver belt buckled gleaming like a polished threat. He looked more like a warlord than a man of God. Children ran at first sight. Mothers pulled them in close. Warriors emerged from lodges, weapons in hand, eyes like flint. Carol stood near the lodge, cornmeal still dust in her palms. She didn't move. Her breath caught as she saw him, Clyde. Just as he looked the night, he bought her with a handshake and a lie. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching dry earth. His gaze swept across the Comanche, then settled on her. There she is, he said, loud enough for all to hear. My runaway dove. N01 moved. Carol stepped forward. I'm not yours, she said. Her voice did not waver. Clyde's smirk was a blade. I paid for you, girl. What you did after, running off like some outlaw bride, that's on you, but you don't get to stay here. You paid for silence, she said. You paid for obedience. But I wasn't yours then. I'm not yours now. His face twisted, anger rising. He turned to the assembled warriors. You think this little village can stand against the law, he bellowed. I've got men behind me with more bullets than you've got arrows. Give her up, or I burn this place to ground. He didn't speak. He didn't draw a blade. He simply walked between Carol and Clyde, raised a spear, not as a threat, but as a truth.